Hello everyone, is Bringonthechaos Glizzy for another. What if Beerus is an Olympian god of destruction? Beerus has been erased because of the mistake Goku, but he encountered the fathers of all angels. He is in a new world field of gods. What will happen to our former G.O.D?
The Olympian God of Destruction. Chapter 10. The Titanomachy 3. Demeter looked up as soon as she noticed the familiar light her mother had exuded before quickly coalescing around the space in front of her. Her olive-brown eyes blinking as the light faded away into particles like it had done before, leaving the figures of her mother and her eldest brother by her side. The former's hand resting on the latter's shoulder as she threw a smile her way. "I'm back," the mother announced a good deal more jubilantly than before. "And I've brought your big brother with me, as you can see." "Oh, Beerus." Demeter smiled a little more lightly, though there was still an apologetic air around her. "Sorry if I interrupted your training." "It's fine. Don't worry about it." Beerus sighed, just glad to have a break away from Gia and her annoying teasing for the time being. "I'll just stand over here and watch. Let me know if you need me." Rhea told him with a nod that he returned, as she stepped out of the way and further to the side. He then stepped forward and sat down in front of his younger sister, with his legs crossed as he folded his arms atop them. "So then, I hear you're having trouble focusing properly, is that right?" "Yeah," the younger sister rubbed her head awkwardly, giving him a sheepish look. "I'm not slacking off, though. I am trying to, it's just. You're not very good at it." Beerus finished for her, getting a nod from the blonde beauty. The purple-haired fledgling god didn't even look the least bit surprised by it, either. HMPH. "I suppose I should have expected that. Even when we were trapped inside of that bastard's stomach, I did notice offhandedly that you had a tendency to have your head wander off somewhere else more often than not. It really was that noticeable, huh?" Demeter bowed her head, even more embarrassed now, despite having known herself this to be true, and that her siblings most likely knew too. Yes. It was. Beerus didn't even try to deny it. Why bother? They wouldn't get anywhere beating around the bush. To be fair though, I can't say I blame you for doing it at the time. Better to keep your mind occupied with something else than think about where you were, I suppose. However, it looks that's become a habit of yours now, one that's a detriment to you now that we're out of there and in training. "Sorry," Demeter bowed her head further in apology, and Beerus frowned while narrowing his eyes sternly at her. "Stop apologizing, Demeter. I came here to give you some assistance, not to hear you feel sorry for yourself. And that's exactly what I intend to do, so don't say that to me again." "Got it. Oh, okay. Understood." The blonde bobbed her head in agreement, her face showing some nervousness as she caught her elder brother's hard gaze. "I'll do my best. Better." He gave a short nod of approval, but nothing else. "Now then, I assume at least that you've felt your inner power. Even if you haven't yet harnessed it. UUHM. Demeter couldn't help but look away, her self-conscious expression alone telling him all he needed to hear, and he found himself giving an even deeper sigh for it. "Seriously? You haven't even felt your power yet?" This was turning out to be worse than he thought. To not be able to harness her inner power like the others could primitively was one thing, but to have not yet even felt it. That was something he'd done within his first day being in this world, and he didn't doubt the rest of their siblings had done in their first days of training by the sounds of what Rhea had told him. "What exactly did our mother tell you to do?" Well, she told us to kneel and then close our eyes, and once we did, pay no mind to the world around us. To just focus our attentions inward, she said, while pointing nervously at her own chest and avoiding her brother's unimpressed stare. And she said that by focusing deep inside ourselves, we'd find and be able to feel our inner power. That sounded about right. And yet, Demeter had managed to go a few whole days now without accomplishing that. This was bordering on straight-up incompetence now, and that was unacceptable. A small part of him, and he meant small, wanted to be a little lenient with her, given that when he was first being taught about his own ki way back when, it had taken him some time to feel it out as well. A full day, if he remembered right. That was still much less egregious than her situation though, as he'd still done it by the end of that day, while she was still falling short of this several days later from when she would have started on it. Time to try and rectify this, I guess. Beerus thought. Let's see if I can't get her up to speed. Okay, he leaned forward with a serious expression. Demeter, I want you to sit how I'm sitting, first. Oh, right. Demeter, though looking a bit perplexed, agreed without fuss and did as she was asked, mirroring her brother's way of sitting. If a little clumsily. Now close your eyes, like you did for our mother. Once again, the younger sibling complied without hesitation, though still looking uncertain. Good. Now, I'm going to make this very simple for you. Don't have your mind wander to anything else. Just focus on the sound of my voice, understand? All right, Demeter nodded a little timidly, perking her ears out for what he'd say next. Good. Now follow my instructions closely, because I hate having to repeat myself. Beerus warned her, as he straightened himself out, placed his hands firmly on his knees and kept a close eye on her features. Just as our mother told you to do before, I want you to focus inward. Though she had tried this numerous times before, Demeter knew better than to argue with her eldest brother and did as she was told. Or attempted to, at least. Her facial features creased as her expression steadily became more strained with each passing moment as she focused her attention inward. Almost to the point where it looked like she was constipated. Beerus frowned at this. Demeter, stop. You'll get nowhere being so tense. You need to loosen yourself up, now. Loosen up. Yes. If you need an example, think of it like you'd do if you were sleeping. Okay. The blonde nodded, a little puzzled but supposed she could sort of see the logic in that. So, does that mean I should try to fall asleep then? Beerus would have gotten annoyed at that, thinking she was trying to be a smartass with him, had it not been for how genuinely innocent she sounded. No, Demeter. You don't have to actually fall asleep. Though he certainly wouldn't mind going for a nap himself right now. Just treat it as if you were. Keep yourself still, but loose. As relaxed as you can be. It'll help, trust me. He should know given all the times he'd been asleep for ages, or in the case of Wiz's training, in meditation. Despite how the latter may have called him hot-headed on occasion, and he still could be, to be frank, he could also be patient when he needed to be. All right, brother. I'll try. She agreed to give it a whirl, choosing to put faith in her brother's words. Brother must know what he's talking about if he did this without guidance himself. If he could do it while under the stress of being trapped inside our father's stomach like the rest of us were, then I should at least be able to do it with his help now that we're finally out of there. At this point, she'd honestly feel like she was bringing shame on 'em both if she couldn't do this. Take a breath if it helps. Beerus added in. Breathe in a nice, long breath of air, and then exhale slowly. The fledgling goddess did as she was told without hesitating. Sucking in a decently sized breath, and then exhaling steadily. Once more. Taking in another breath, Demeter let out a loud ha as she exhaled. Her features, as well as her posture, already starting to look much more relaxed than they'd been before. Beerus actually gave an almost unnoticeable smirk at this. He could tell that none of them even required air or oxygen to survive, quite like he'd been back in his old universe, but that didn't stop such an old-fashioned breathing technique from being rather useful regardless. Good. That's much better. You should never be straining yourself while meditating. Continue to focus inward but remain as tensionless as possible. She made a sound of acknowledgement, as the air around her became much more peaceful. The woman's mind currently taking in nothing other than the sound of his voice. Good. Good. Beerus had to stop himself from yawning, as he leaned back and placed his hands on the ground behind him. All the talk about relaxation was actually starting to make him a little sleepy. A nap would have to wait for later though. Keep at this for as long as it takes. Believe me, you'll know you've found it once you do. The feeling it gives off is impossible to miss. From there, Beerus and Rhea both watched on, keeping a close eye on her as she sat there in a much more tranquil, meditative position. The latter with her arms crossed and merely observing for now, while the former was more laid back, but still very much focused on her in case he saw any sign her mind was beginning to wander again. Okay Demeter, you can do this. She breathed in, then out again. Such a simple thing, and yet surprisingly effective in helping her keep herself calm and composed. Her brother's words echoing in her mind, as she delved deep inside herself. Searching for the power she was naturally born with, as were all the others. Under her brother's watchful gaze, and that of her mother's, she maintained her concentration this time, whilst maintaining the relaxed posture that her brother had told her to do. The whole process beginning to feel less like a hassle, and more pleasant, in a way, as she went on. Minutes passed by as she sat there, searching within herself. For once this time uninterrupted by her typical absent-mindedness. And eventually, she was rewarded for it. I think that's it, the woman perked up, as she felt something respond deep inside her. A sensation like butterflies flapping their wings inside her belly flowing out from inside her whole body. Yes, I think I feel it. She said excitedly. Don't get too excited just yet. Beerus replied bemusedly, though it was hard for even him not to grin at her sudden, childish enthusiasm. Keep that focus, Demeter. You need to start harnessing it first before you start cheering. The older fledgling's words petered off. His eyes widening before blinking in some astonishment, as though not fully believing what he was seeing, as a thin greenish aura enveloped the seated, curvaceous younger sibling. Brother, look. I did it. I can feel it coursing through me now. It's radiating all over my body. The buxom blonde's excitement rose as her eyes peeled open, full of elation that even he hadn't quite seen in them, as she splayed her arms out. Her eyes shooting all around herself as she marveled at the sensation of her own inner power being stoked, and the sight of her aura encompassing every bit of her form. Looking about as vibrant as she felt right now. Well, I'll be damned, Beerus thought, admittedly taken aback by the proceedings. She actually managed to harness her power in one go just as soon as she felt it. Granted, it was by no means close to all of it, but still, the fact that she could pull this much out at all so quickly after failing to even feel it for this long was quite jarring, to say the least. It was like a switch had been flipped in her or something. One that made her go from dim-witted to, dare he say, actually competent to some degree. Well now, it looks like she was more competent than first believed. Rhea chimed in with no small amount of amusement, grabbing Beerus's attention. It seems as though once she got over that hurdle of getting herself to focus properly and stop her mind from wandering off so much, the rest came easy to her. You're telling me? Beerus muttered, shaking off the disbelief at just how fast that had occurred. It may not have been as fast as when he'd done it the first time in Cronus Gut, but he had the benefit of many years of experience with Ki, something that was vaguely similar to the power that lay within him and pretty much everyone else in this world. Enough so to where he'd known what to do for the most part, which made the process fairly easy for him. Demeter didn't have that. All she'd had was his and Rhea's advice on how she should go about it, and she'd nailed it in seconds after getting over her usual absent-mindedness, if only for the time being. Beerus, you were right. Listening to you and keeping myself relaxed really did help a lot. She squealed happily. Loud enough to draw the attention of their other siblings, in fact, as her smile practically split her own face. Her hands drawn and clenched near her chest as she exuded a childlike delight that completely belied her adult appearance. I can see that, Beerus chuckled at her giddiness, as he shrugged off the surprise of her succeeding in harnessing the first bit of her power so fast. She was likely still a little behind the others, but the gap had certainly become much shorter than before in what seemed like the blink of an eye. Talk about unexpected, but certainly not unwelcome, that was for sure. Well then, I guess your work is done here, Beerus. Thank you for the assistance. Rhea said a bit more jollily herself as she stepped forward, turning to her daughter with a broad, proud smile. And as for you, my dear. Good work there, Demeter. If you keep up a pace like that, you might just leap over the rest of your siblings' progress. Well, I wouldn't go that far. The purple-haired deity cut in, as he got up to his feet and stretched out his arms. A smirk still etched over his features. Still, I'll give her this. Harnessing it that quickly after only just feeling it is a little bit impressive. Little bit. Rhea quirked an enthused brow. Someone's hard to please, it seems. What can I say? He shrugged. I have high standards. It'll take a lot more than this to truly, wow, me. Well, all right, Mr. Big Shot. Rhea gave a humid grin, as she propped her hands on her hips. High standards. Even though she knew he was being genuine, it was hard to deny how chucklesome it was for her inwardly that he and Hera were beginning to sound more alike. Why don't you get back to your own training then, Go on, Scoot. She bobbed her head sideways to motion him to leave. You've done your part here. Now get your ass back to training with Mother and we'll see if those high standards of yours hold up for yourself. HMPH. And when the heck did you get so bossy? Beerus snarked back without batting an eye, somewhat amused by his mother's audacity. Still, you have a point. I should be getting back now. And hopefully when he did, it was with less teasing from his current teacher. After all, there's nothing for me to do for anyone else here at present. Other than flirt with Hera, I suppose. Rhea couldn't help but throw in slyly with a wink. Something that got a groan from Beerus as he turned away. Of course, I'd prefer if you wait until her training for today is over before you two start doing that again. Oh, for crying out loud. I'm already putting up with enough of that teasing crap from Gia. I don't need you adding on to that. He grumbled, his somewhat humid mood dropping like an anvil. It wasn't flirting, damn it. What is wrong with these two? he thought incredulously as he started to walk away. He didn't make it far though, before he heard the pattering of bare feet on the ground, and a pair of lithe arms encircled around his waist. The fledgling god halted in his tracks, with a look of mild surprise as he glanced down behind him. Amber eyes met olive brown, as Demeter embraced him from behind. Her supple, perky D-cup breasts pressing and squishing into his back as she hugged him close. What in the? Thank you so much, Beerus. The younger sibling hooted joyfully with a beaming smile. If not for your advice, I would have been stuck on that for ages. Sure, Beerus tersely acknowledged, as he somewhat awkwardly reached back and patted her head. Such an affectionate gesture, still not something he was very acclimatized to by any stretch. Idly aware that their other siblings close by were watching him right now with varying expressions of amusement themselves. No problem. If you don't mind though, I need to get back to my own training. Before you go, can I give you something to show my thanks? She asked kindly, while still holding on to him. That isn't really necessary, Beerus tried to refuse, only for her to tighten her grip on him, and give him a bit of a pleading look. Please. Out came what he could only describe as puppy dog eyes, as she stared right up into his amber pools. Bloody hell, Beerus's face scrunched up at her expression, his awkwardness doubling like the snap of a finger as he pulled his gaze away from her. Hadn't he told them all already that he'd give guidance when needed? She didn't need to thank him any further than what she'd done already and keep at her training. He could tell that she didn't see it that way though. Telling her that wouldn't change her mind. Fine, the older of the two sighed, deciding it was better to just give her this so he could back to his own thing, and she wouldn't bug him about it. After all, what else could she give him other than a silly hug? A trinket he didn't know about, perhaps. What is it? Could you turn around for me, first? She asked politely, pulling away from the hug as her boobs jiggled back into shape within her tunic. Sure, he complied, turning to meet her and get this mushy crap over with. What is it? He blinked again when he felt Demeter's soft, delicate hands being placed on his cheeks, and saw her beaming up at him. Huh. What are you MMPH? The ex-god of Universe 7's eyes shot wide in shock, as the straw-blonde beauty leaned up suddenly and captured his lips with hers. The former stunned beyond belief as the woman pressed her lips passionately against his seemingly out of nowhere. Her eyes closing as she brought herself closer, squishing her bountiful bosom against his rock-hard chest as she pushed herself even deeper into the kiss with him. Oh my, Rhea brought her hand up as she made a face of surprise at Demeter's actions. One that was almost mirrored by the two's other four siblings watching. None of them having expected her to do something like that. They stayed there like that for a good few seconds. Eventually though, Demeter pulled back and broke the lip lock she'd initiated. Before a dumbstruck Beerus, she gave a satisfied, content smile with a light blush to her cheeks as she stepped back and clasped her hands behind her back. Take this for some good luck. Hope you do well with your own training, Beerus. She waved happily, an extra bit of skip to her step as she turned and walked back to her spot. It took a small moment after, but soon enough, the cogs started to turn rapidly in Beerus's head as he saw her off with pupils the size of pinpricks. And with it, an internal scream burst forth as his face began to contort rather comically, as his mind processed a single thought from what had just occurred. What the fuck? A hand flew up to his mouth, clamping down on the lower part of his face as his mind began to whir at 1,000,000 miles a minute. Did she actually just? Oh, Oh, he was damn sure no expert on this, given it would have been a cold day in hell back in his previous life that he ever let Champa near him with any sort of mushy affection, and same to the latter. It would have been downright repulsive for the two of them, even if they did care about the other deep down. Still, he was fairly certain that a kiss between brother and sister wasn't supposed to have been like that. While he would have grumbled at it, a peck on the cheek he could deal with. Simple, quick, and done. Not a problem if he had to take that. He could easily just wipe his cheek later if he felt so inclined. That had most certainly not been a peck. That was a full-blown, drawn-out snog right on the lips that packed a kind of passion behind it that was in no way familial. Not in his damn book anyway, it was way too raw. Beerus paled, still able to feel a bit of moisture on his lips that definitely wasn't his. His mental side mustered an ungodly amount of repulsion that almost made him dry heave in comedic fashion. Meanwhile, as though to mock him, his new body was the total opposite. To his skyrocketing horror, his body had the absolute gall to feel excited. As if to make matters infinitely worse, he felt a lower part of his blasted anatomy stir beneath his tunic, a very unfamiliar feeling, but one he knew of nonetheless. Arousal. Oh, Zeno have mercy. This bastard body of his was, ugh. Well now, it looks like Hera might have some competition. Rhea couldn't help but say humorously. Partially joking, partially not, as she giggled at her eldest son's expression. How could she not? From her perspective, Demeter had seemed to give him a right good shell-shocking with that one. Look out, Beerus, you may just have two fine women vying for you now. Kill me, someone kill me, Beerus thought languidly. His eyes that of a man who'd just gone through something so harrowing it left him weak in the knees from dread. Juxtaposed in his opinion by a present reminder of his body having something wrong with it, as a tent was beginning to form in the lower part of his tunic. If not to kill him, was there a mountain high enough that he could jump off and land on his head to forget this ever happened? Because he could really do with that right about now. Stiffly turning away, Beerus wiped his mouth hard. His face set into a deep grimace as the taste of Demeter's lips didn't quite come off. NGNN, what are you lot gawking at? He shouted out loudly towards the others in indignation, suddenly more cognizant than ever that they were looking at him, and in this case, he really didn't appreciate being the center of attention. Get back to training. There's nothing to see here. By his former lord's robes, he needed something to rinse his mouth with ASAP before he thought about training again. And perhaps something to castrate himself with while he was at it. Not even waiting for them to do so, having lost his patience, Beerus stormed off with a comically strained expression like he was holding in bath. Each of his siblings being left to watch him off with varying degrees of bemusement. Hey! Someone was pretty touchy there. Poseidon couldn't help but comment, looking over to his other older brother sat some good meters away. And here I thought his reaction to our little family hug a while back was a little over the top. Hades chose not to reply, having too much respect for his brother to comment on his odd behavior, even if he too found it to be somewhat droll. Hestia, kind soul that she was, looked at her twins retreating back with some concern, but otherwise left him be. Believing that it must have just been the surprise of Demeter's action that made her brother more irritable, as given what he was like, he likely just didn't quite know how to respond to it. He was a little awkward when it came to affections, after all. Hera, meanwhile, narrowed her eyes as she kept her gaze on his retreating form. the place where she was sat giving her a good enough angle to continue seeing his expression that the others couldn't for a little longer, allowing her to see just how perturbed he looked. All from that single kiss. Him, the indescribably beautiful woman smirked cunningly, ignoring this strange feeling she got in her gut from seeing that. I might have to thank you, Demeter. You may have just shown me a way to get back at him. She'd have to put more thought into it later, of course, but she could already feel the beginnings of a plan starting to form in her mind. Roughly 2 weeks later. All right, everyone, gather around. Rhea called out to her 5 children authoritatively, quickly garnering their attention, as they all moved closer to and stopped in a semicircle around her. She gave a proud, motherly smile towards all of them, as she continued. You've all done a splendid job with what I asked of you to do. I think you've all had more than enough time now to grow accustomed to your own power and harness it to an acceptable degree. You all have a much greater presence about you than when we first started, which is good. She nodded with satisfaction, before gaining a stern look. Now, however, I think it's time we branched out your training for some added efficiency. And how do you plan on doing that, Mother? Hades asked, raising an inquisitive brow as he crossed his arms over his broad chest. I'm glad you asked, Hades. She acknowledged and went on without missing a beat. Now that you all have a reasonable control over your inner power, it's time to start putting it to use in practice. There's plenty to go over, so this should be a fun ride. Like what, Mother? Poseidon asked curiously. Rather than answer verbally right away, Rhea just smiled knowingly at her second youngest son, as her body suddenly began to morph right before their eyes. Her shapely, hourglass figure kept inside of her conservative tunic disappearing in the blink of an eye and being replaced by a small furry creature on all fours barely 10 inches in height. They all blinked, as the creature's form shimmered with a golden touch before dematerializing into golden particles, only to then rematerialize in the same fashion, to Poseidon's bewilderment and awe, atop his muscular shoulder. Rhea, now transformed into a dark cat, gave her new tail a small wag atop her son's shoulder as she continued on with a more feline grin. For starters, I will teach you all how to dematerialize and then rematerialize in different locations at will, as well as guide you through how to shapeshift into whatever you may desire. With that said, she hopped off Poseidon's shoulder a good few feet away. Her body morphing again and growing in size before it even touched the ground. When her paws struck the ground, she no longer resembled a tiny cat, but a fully grown, fearsome lion with sharp fangs and a large mane akin to that of a male that lead its pride. The now lion Rhea looked out over her cubs, with a strong gaze, and a much deeper voice coming from her maw. There's more to come, but these abilities in particular will be a great help to you mastering your control over your inner power. They are both relatively simple to learn but challenging to master. The further along you come with these, the better control you'll have over each of your natural-born power. By the time you'll have mastered these two, you'll be able to vanish and reappear anywhere you wish at will, and as many times in quick succession as you desire, as well as transform into various different creatures or objects. All, of course, at will, and cycle through one to the other as fast as your minds can conceive it. It'll be a great learning process for you. Huh, that's pretty cool. Poseidon couldn't help but comment with a look of wonder, gaining an excited smile on his bearded face. Very cool, Demeter agreed with a joyful nod. By the way, Mother. She looked at the lion quizzically with an upbeat demeanor. Will Beerus be coming around at some point? There's no need for him to do so right now, Demeter. The mother replied helpfully, as she transformed back into her normal form, hands on her hips. Beerus will only come around from his own training if he wants to, or I believe one of you needs some of his guidance to help you along, remember. And thankfully, as far as she is concerned, none of them other than Demeter early on had needed him. And she didn't think that because she didn't appreciate him. Far from it. In her mind, it just went to show she could do a good job guiding the rest of them herself, as any dutiful mother should, without having to pull her eldest boy away from his own important training. She'd love it if he and Zeus were here with her too and learning under her, but alas, the former had already pulled ahead and chosen gear to help him in the final step of his development, while the latter got snagged by his consort for his. A shame really, but she didn't let it get to her. He. Poseidon chuckled, a mischievous gleam in his eyes, as he glanced toward his blonde-haired sister. Either that, or he's too shy to come round after that smooch you gave him. Hades raised a brow at that comment, while Demeter's attention came firmly to her second youngest brother with a look of surprise. Really? You never know. Poseidon shrugged, humor dusting his voice. Maybe the real reason he hasn't shown up again yet is because he doesn't know how to respond to your affections. He broached as he began stroking his beard. Or maybe, he's biding his time waiting for the perfect moment to pay you back. You seemed to have made quite the impression on him last we saw. You think so? The blonde blushed lightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Looking more interested in the prospect than someone who'd simply given a kiss for good luck. Hardly. Hades cut in with a deadpan, as he gave his younger sibling an unimpressed look. Poseidon stopped stirring the pot. You and I both know you're talking out of your ass. That doesn't even sound remotely like something our brother would do. Or, come now, Hades. We don't know that for certain, do we? Poseidon grinned childishly, not content to let it go just yet. For all we know, Demeter's little act could have stirred something within Beerus. And right now, he could be thinking of how to approach her for some more intimate lessons, if you will. He snickered. How crass. Hera rolled her eyes. A strange feeling welling up within her again at such a confounded scenario. Ugh. You must be joking. Who says I'm joking? Poseidon threw back with a cheeky look of his own, clasping his hands behind his head. I'm being completely serious here, sister. Is that so? Hestia giggled amusedly at her younger sibling's antics. Well then, why don't we have Mother fetch Beerus for you then, so you can ask him about it directly? She smiled sweetly in his direction. Too sweetly. I'm sure he would love to give you an honest answer, Poseidon. Since you seem so curious. Poseidon froze, an involuntary shiver crawling down his spine for reasons he couldn't quite gauge. Something telling him in the back of his head that that would be an awful idea, as though nothing but pure, unmitigated agony awaited him if he was ballsy enough to do that. After a small moment, he let out a nervous laugh as he looked away. Hey, I think I'll pass on that. That's probably for the best. Rhea remarked with an entertained tone, though she just couldn't quite help herself as she turned back to Demeter with a guileful grin. We wouldn't want to put him on the spot, after all. Okay, that was a lie. His reactions to things like that were just too adorable. Still, she'd be sure to hold off on him with any teasing of her own for now. Call it a mother's intuition, but she had a feeling things would only get more amusing for him in the future, and when they did, the opportunity would be ripe for her to indulge in plenty of her own motherly teasing on her oldest son. The Titaness let that thought go for the moment, as she refocused on the reason they were here. Anyways, getting back on topic. Outside of those two abilities, I'll also be teaching you all how to fight. I know I may not look it, but I know a thing or two about combat. She smirked deviously. And who knows? I might just get your big brother to tag along and help out at some point. Her gaze pointedly shifted to Poseidon. Maybe get him to spar one of you, so you can practice what you're learning on a powerful opponent. How kind of you, mother, the wavy-haired deity paled, his mind recalling what his brother had been able to do within the castle atop Mount Othries. Hades chuckled, seeing his little brother becoming nervous at the idea of sparring Beerus. Something the youngest brother would be doing soon enough. Hey, he couldn't wait to watch that spectacle. Personally, he relished the opportunity to get a spar from his brother. He'd no doubt get his ass kicked, but he was sure he'd learn plenty from the experience. He wasn't sure why, but Beerus just seemed to give off the air that he held a lot of experience when it came to fighting, despite only being a little older than himself. I'm sure you'll continue to do a splendid job, mother. Hestia complimented good-naturedly. She wasn't a fan of violence by any stretch, but she knew the current dangers that resided out in the world for her and the others from the Titans. To not at least be able to defend herself if she were ever put in a compromising situation would be quite foolish, after all. And other than her twin, she didn't trust anyone greater to help them all with that than their mother currently. Shall we begin? Rhea took the naked praise from her eldest child for what it was and nodded gratefully before answering her question. Yes, we shall. Looking out over all of her assembled children, the Titan goddess folded her arms beneath her perky chest mounds. We'll start out simple today. You'll all just be focusing on the two abilities I've shown you. Combat will be mixed in from tomorrow onwards, which you can choose to do by yourself or with a partner. The choice is up to you. Just letting you all know ahead of time, I'll be going a lot harder on you all then to make sure you do well, so be prepared. They all nodded in acknowledgement, and so Rhea pressed on. Both of these abilities are similar enough in how they're done. For shape-shifting, all you have to do is visualize in your mind a vivid picture of what you want to be and will your power to turn you into it. Same principle applies for dematerializing and rematerializing. All you need do is visualize where you want to be, and then will your power to transport you there. Sounds simple enough. Hades opined gruffly. The others seeming to agree. Well then you better get to it, all of you. Rhea exclaimed before vanishing, leaving those bits of gold behind as she appeared behind them with her arms still crossed. Their heads snapping to her as she eyed them all critically, dark pools shining with maternal pride. I look forward to seeing your progress. And with that, they all got to work as she'd asked. The rest of the day going by as each of them practiced what had been demonstrated. The first day of their more practical training didn't go completely smoothly, however. It had a few interesting hiccups from some of them. For example, the first time Poseidon attempted teleportation towards a nearby rock as his target, he succeeded, though not in the way he would have liked, seeing as he face-planted on it rather than landing on his feet. Something that brought his siblings, even Hestia to a lesser degree, some bit of humor. Then there was Demeter, whose first attempt to transform herself into the small cat their mother had went rather okay, if you discounted the fact that she did so without any limbs. Something that had led to a rather hilarious panic from her for a moment until she transformed back, arms and legs still perfectly there. Hades made an error midway through the day when trying, in hindsight, to perform multiple teleports in quick succession that he wasn't quite prepared to do just yet. something that ended with splatting back first rather roughly onto the ground from a good 10-meter fall. While a bit embarrassing, he could say at the very least it was a more respectable botch than his brother's. Hera, for the most part, did perfectly fine throughout the entire session. Her only real mistake coming when, like Hades, a bit of hubris got to her with how well she was doing. The youngest daughter of Kronos and Rhea attempting rather boldly to both teleport and transform into something else at roughly the same time. Only her lower half transformed, and while she performed the teleport perfectly, let's just say being half humanoid from the top and half lion from the bottom didn't lend well to balance. Her immaculate, ravishing face had gotten well acquainted with the ground not 2 seconds later, with her then furry ass jutting up high in the air in a moment Hades knew for certain would have had Beerus bursting with laughter had he been there to witness it. Hestia, remarkably, was the only one of them not to make any funny missteps through the whole day. That was mainly due to the glowing-eyed woman being able to pace herself properly, and never allow herself to feel even a tinge of cockiness in her current capabilities. She was a bit less experimental and more conservative in her approach, which had paid out well for her. By the end of the first session, she actually seemed to be doing the best out of all of them. All in all, though, they all thought they'd ended the day fairly well, and were sufficiently ready for their mother to go in harder in the preceding days. Indeed, even when their mother had started with them the next day, while a good deal harder with the added combat training, it still seemed to them like things would be relatively smooth sailing. Except, with each passing day after that, Rhea grew stricter, and more demanding of them. The two activities of mastering the abilities shown to them and learning how to fight also steadily melded together into one. By the 7th day their more physical training had started, the two kinds of training they were being given, had essentially become one. And it was grueling. Oh, shit, Poseidon gasped, almost falling to his knees, as strain both mental and physical clawed at him, and were it not for his physiology, would have been throwing up right this minute. The tan-skinned fledgling deity bracing himself, as his tree-trunk-like legs wobbled. A large, chestnut-brown serpent came into view then, striking out for his face with its jaws open wide, poised to chomp down with its fangs and tear at his flesh. Deep green eyes widening as he was only just able to avoid the bite at the last second, as he dematerialized into golden specks. His body reappearing above the snake midair as he steeled himself and raised a foot to stomp on it. The snake coiled and rather easily avoided the stomping foot as it slammed down, before swiftly coiling up his body and binding him with an unbelievably strong grip. A hiss coming from its open mouth as it came face to face with him. Too predictable. It spoke, before it dematerialized just as he'd done up above him, its tail wrapping hard around his bulky neck before the rest of its body touched the ground again. Right as he was pulled off of it, flipped around in midair by his neck, and then slammed down unceremoniously into the ground on his face hard enough to form a sizable crater. A feat considering the whole Isle of Crete was reinforced by Gear's divine magic to be extra durable. The large chestnut-brown snake turned its serpentine head as its senses alerted it to an attack from the side, proceeding to duck and narrowly avoid a bite of its own from an equally large snake. One that was charcoal black in color. They hissed at each other, before getting into a wrestling bout of sorts, twisting and turning around each other vying for some sort of dominance as they slithered away from the groaning Poseidon. The charcoal snake inevitably grew frustrated as the other started to quickly gain ground, and immediately transformed itself. A humanoid hand shooting out before it had fully finished and latching onto the upper part of the snake's throat with a vice-like grip, as a foot shot out and stomped down successfully on the tail. all to stop it from attempting to coil around his body. The snake, entirely unperturbed, immediately transformed itself too. The serpentine body vanishing from the grip it was in as in its place, a butterfly of all things appeared and flapped past the guard of its would-be assailant with a level of speed too quick for them to react to. Hades' black eyes barely had time to glance behind him before the butterfly transformed again, and a delicate-looking hand swiped forth and backhanded him across the cheek. The force of it, despite looking rather casual, sent the ghostly pale-skinned god careening off to the side and tumbling ass over head along the ground a good distance away. Good ferocity, but your own reactions need plenty of work. Rhea stated matter-of-factly as her eyes remained on her second oldest son for a moment. Gaze strict and unyielding. A fist suddenly blared to life by her other side, carried by lingering golden flecks of teleportation, mere inches from her cheek. One that never struck home, as her own body shimmered away with golden particles, leaving the thrust fist to sail through nothing but air. Poseidon didn't even have time to think about how to deal with his sucker punch having missed, before an open hand smacked him hard enough across the face from his exposed side that spittle flew from his lips as his head snapped to the side. His feet coming off the ground once again as he sent sailing off into the distance, colliding with and smashing through the very rock he'd face planted on earlier in training before coming to a stop. Better, but you'll need to be sharper than that. Rhea shouted out to make sure he heard her. Ugh, what? Poseidon asked dismally, rubbing his head as he picked himself up. A trickle of ichor spilling down over the left side of his face. His body having healed itself of injury quite a few times by this point just today alone. She's still here and wants you to be the best that you can be. Rhea shot back without missing a beat. Voice stalwart and uncompromising. I have to go hard on you in order to ensure that. I thought I told you that already. Hard is one way to put it, the green-eyed fledgling thought morosely with a sweat drop. She might as well have flipped a switch from loving and gentle mother, to near stone-faced slave driver at this point. Yeah, you did, not quite sure right now though that the first part of that is true. Ugh. Quit whining, Poseidon. Hades grunted, as he shimmered into existence beside his birth mother with a fist reared back. A smirk on his face despite the hit he'd just taken. So, what if our mom is being a hard ass? His punch shot forth and missed Rhea's face by a hair as she leaned away from it. Far as I see it, her going in like this is only motivating me further to get up to speed. Who are you calling a hard ass, young man? Rhea teased, a light grin forming on her lips for a brief moment. How rude. I think it's my duty as your mother to teach you some proper manners, seeing as neither Beerus nor Hestia seem to have done so. Off to the side a ways away, the three sisters had stopped their own training in favor of watching their mother spar with their brothers. She's certainly gotten into this, hasn't she? Hera couldn't help but ask to no one in particular, as she watched her mother literally slap Hades away. His body carving a deep trench in the ground as soon as it touched and skidded along it, in what had to be a good mile out this time. Yeah. Demeter nodded, a look of awe on her face, as Poseidon launched back in, only to be casually avoided, have the back of his head grabbed, and then have his whole body sent hurtling in Hades' direction. All without Rhea batting an eye. Mom's pretty good. I'll bet even Beerus would be impressed. The statement wasn't completely inaccurate. Rhea was by no means a martial arts master, but had he been watching, even Beerus would have conceded that she did know her stuff to a decent degree. Hestia giggled from her spot in the middle. Her bright, warm mood having not been dampened by their mother's increasing harshness in the slightest. Perhaps. In any case, it looks like Hades is getting what he wanted, at least. Their mother had only just today decided to get much more hands-on with their training and had thus decided that the best way to do that was to have them all spar with her. Also, she could directly help with eliminating their flaws more proactively. She'd taken Hades and Poseidon first, and left them to do theirs on their own until she was finished with them, mainly because Hades had asked to go first, because he wanted to get the jump on the rest of them. Even going so far as to ask their mother to not hold back in making sure he improved, so that whenever Beerus showed up again, he could show her twin how far he was coming along. He hadn't said that last bit, but she knew that was one of his reasons why. It was so obvious from her viewpoint. He wanted to impress his big brother with his growth, she could see it in his eyes, and found it to be the cutest thing ever. Well, she hoped he was happy with what he got. Because she knew that at the moment, Poseidon wasn't the most keen on it, though that didn't stop him from giving his best anyway. If getting his ass kicked is what he wanted, I guess. Hera snorted derisively, shaking her head as the three of them watched both brothers return and attempt to gang up on Rhea and double-team her together this time rather than go in separately. The two teleporting on either side of her with a punch being thrown. The sisters winced as Rhea easily dodged both once again and retaliated by grabbing both their heads and smashing them together with a loud, audible clap. A miniature shockwave resulting from the force with which she brought their heads together with. One that kicked up the wind and made the tunics rustle as the Titanus-covered tits jiggled excitedly within their confines. Both brothers crumpled to the ground not a second later. Girls, she called out to them, dusting her hands as though she'd just taken out the trash, as she looked over at them with a hard gaze. Less chatting, more training. You'll be with me soon, so you'd better be ready. Yes, mother. They all nodded in agreement. Hestia still smiling brightly and unperturbed, despite her distaste for violence. Hera looked ready to take it on with confidence if needs be. And Demeter looked a little nervous, but ready to give it a whirl, nonetheless. She didn't want to fall behind again, after all. Once their time inevitably did come, Rhea gave them no mercy, and they rolled with the punches as best they could. They all took a beating, as they did the best to keep to the standards their mother was setting for them. Doing their level best to mix in their new abilities with the, admittedly rather amateurish fighting capabilities. Just as Poseidon and Hades had tried to do, with varying degrees of minor success. All as Rhea pointed out every flaw and mistake they made along the way, as she gave them what might as well be called a tough love beating for their efforts. Both Hera and Demeter noticed though that Rhea seemed to take it easier on Hestia whenever a mistake was made by her, simply bopping her on the head or tapping her on the shoulder before telling her what she lacked or did wrong. It would have annoyed Hera, especially given they were getting it harder, as it would have to their brothers who watched from the sidelines like they did, as they continued their training themselves. Had it been anyone other than Hestia, of course. Pretty much everyone was in agreement, including Rhea, that harming Hestia at all, even for a spar, just felt wrong. In any case, this didn't seem to impede the eldest sister in learning at all. She was soaking it all up like a sponge, just as good as Hera or Demeter were. No, she actually might have been doing a little better than the two of them, though it was hard to tell. The days went on like this from there, and Rhea went in as much as she needed to ensure that they would all get up to snuff. She didn't let up even once during it, as she passed on as much as she could to her children, wanting them to be as prepared as she could make them for what may come. Approximately 1 month since training had started, elsewhere on Crete. So, is this the place where he is, Mother? A gruff male voice asked, as 5 pairs of feet touched down on the sandy shores of the westernmost part of Crete. Yes. There's no doubt about it. I can feel Gia's magic permeating throughout the whole isle, now that I'm here. And I can also feel Ria's presence as well, alongside 7 others that I don't recognize. A regal feminine voice replied back, stood 1 step ahead of the other 4 figures. Each of which having their own dark cloak to cover themselves, with a hood obscuring their faces. The one in front having a white cloak instead that billowed softly in the wind, showing hints of her pale, shapely figure beneath. Beneath her own hood, dark brown eyes narrowed sharply. This is the place where he must be. I'm certain of it. I hope this'll be worth the risk. Another female voice spoke behind the cloaked woman, sounding quite frustrated. It was such a pain getting here without any of them noticing us coming, particularly Hyperion. I don't think I've ever seen him patrol up in the sky anywhere near as much as he's doing now. Guy's so laser focused we had to rely on you to cover us all from his view until we got here. The distinctly female figure sighed as she glanced up to the sky, seeing off far into the endless distance of the heavens, lines of heavenly light being cut through the sky by the surveying Titan with his consort in tow. They really want to find this guy bad. Yes, quite right, Nike. Things have become rather hectic since Kronos's children escaped from their father. The female at the front mused. If the nymphs are to be believed, the purple-haired one is the one mainly responsible for it. I must say, I look forward to meeting him. To get them all this riled up, he must be something special. The hood of her cloak cascaded down then, revealing long, wavy brown hair that ran down her back and fell over one of her shoulders. Her face that of such riveting beauty that it was comparable to that of the sea under a wonderful midnight glow of the moon. Full red lips to go with a small, refined chin, sharp cheekbones with a small blush of red to them, contrasting well with her unearthly pale complexion. Her jawline was narrow, with her nose small and fair, beneath her witty-set eyes and fairly high forehead. Time to meet the one bold enough to declare war on Kronos and his ilk. The woman smiled. For if he truly wishes to do so, then I shall be sure to aid him as much as I can, because it's about time someone challenged their rule. Meanwhile, back further inland. Ah, Metis, Zeus, it's good to see you. Gia said kindly, one of her massive globes of flesh wobbling as her arm brushed past it to wave at the oncoming Oceanid and youngest born of Rhea making their way over. You as well, Lady Gia. Metis greeted courteously with a friendly, respectful smile as she stopped right by the extremely bodacious Protogenos. Zeus giving one similar, absent of any perverted leering. Not to intrude, but I think you know why we're here. The primordial goddess of the earth and life smiled knowingly. Ah yes, I believe I do. The buxom deity turned her attention towards where she'd set up her magic-enhanced dummy, right on the back of her current pupil stood stock-still before it. A hand that had previously been raised towards the still damage-less creation of hers lowering, as his ears picked up what was being said. What do you say, Beerus? She asked pointedly, casting her gaze in said person's direction. HMPH. What do I say? Beerus's head turned as he looked back at them. His amber eyes narrowed like slits. Honestly, I was beginning to think you'd chickened out. Hardly. The Oceanid shot down, able to tell he was just saying that to wind him up. her gaze hard as steel upon him. I never go back on my word, and neither does Zeus. He's fully prepared now to spar with you. Hey. I'll be the judge of that. Beerus turned fully, his eyes inspecting his younger brother. I suppose I'll take another break from this training of mine, and see what you've got, Zeus. I won't disappoint you, brother. Zeus stated relatively calmly, meeting his brother's gaze head on. Metis has prepped me well for it, and I trust her judgment. Has she now? Beerus didn't fail to catch the small hint of anxiousness that exuded out beneath his calm exterior. Even still, it seemed like he did genuinely believe those words. How interesting. Yes. Zeus nodded affirmatively. I'm sure it'll be a good learning experience for the both of us. Hey. There was that line of thought again that he could benefit too. In all honesty, it sounded laughable to him when Metis had said it, and it still did now when Zeus was saying it in his own way. It did intrigue him though, so he'd give them the benefit of the doubt. For all he knew, they might actually have a surprise in store for him to make this affair entertaining. We'll see about that. Beerus brought his hands behind his back, balled into fists as they touched together. His amber pools reflecting his baby brother in their surface, as he said, "We can start here, if that's fine with you." Hold on, now. Gia interjected, grabbing their attention. How about you both start this little spar of yours where the rest of your siblings are? I'd say it'd be a good thing for them to watch you both go at it. Do you mean that in terms of what they could learn from watching it, or just for some entertainment? Metis queried. Both. Mother Earth smiled brightly. Think of it as a little treat for your brothers and sisters, who I'm sure have all been working hard themselves in their training. I'm fine with that, I guess. Zeus nodded his assent after a brief moment, before shifting focus back to Beerus. And you, brother? Fine. Why not? He shrugged. It had been a while since he'd gone over to them. After all, their mother seemed to be doing a good enough job that his guidance wasn't needed yet, so he supposed that could work. Now that he'd had plenty of time to simmer down on his own after the first time he'd gone to give aid ended with a snog from an overly grateful blonde sister of his. One that he mentally despised the fact that even now, his confounded new body had found enjoyable. Hopefully, there'd be no more incidents like that in the future. He could really do without that crap. This body had baffled him more than enough as it was with the shit it didn't seem to mind. Or in that case, somehow enjoy. Splendid. Gia nodded, looking pleased. Let's head over there, so. She moved closer to Beerus's side, mountainous globes jiggling and swaying on her chest, as she laid a hand on his shoulder. This should be fun, after all. Don't you think, Beerus? I suppose. He let himself grin, despite himself, feeling a small bit of anticipation. Let's just hope that there's not any misplaced confidence here. The smile Metis gave back just before they dematerialized was an odd but assured one. You'll see for yourself, Beerus. I have faith that you'll see things from my perspective soon enough. Bold words. No matter how confident though, they were just that to him. Words. Once they started, he'd finally see for himself whether or not this girl was just blowing hot air. And right now, he honestly did hope they could deliver. He'd rather be entertained by a welcome surprise than be bored to death by lacking efforts. She said she had faith. Well then, time to see what his little brother could do. the Olympian god of destruction. Chapter 11, the Titanomachy IV. Well, look who we have here. Rhea smiled, as the familiar light of teleportation glimmered through between herself and her children during a brief lull period. Any thought of training being put on hold as the figures of Zeus, Metis, Gaia and Beerus appeared before. Apologies for the interruption, Rhea. Gaia said kindly, removing her hand from Beerus's shoulder. It is just that the youngest has finished his preparation, and according to Metis, is ready to spar his eldest brother here, and I thought it'd be a good idea for them to start here. So that their siblings can watch them, I presume. Rhea all but read her mind, as she folded her arms beneath her bosom and smiled a little wider. Quite. The protogenos nodded. I believe it could be some good entertainment for us, as well as a good learning experience for the rest of her children to see them both have a go at each other. Can't say I disagree with that. Rhea shook her head with some amusement, glancing at her youngest and eldest boys before looking out over the rest of her gathered children. All of you, we'll be taking a break for now, it seems. Get yourselves comfortable, as I'd say we're about to see something good between your brothers. Hey. Was wondering when this was gonna happen. Hades grinned, thrilled to get to see his brother Beerus in action again, whilst curious about his younger brother's useful fare. This should be fun to watch. For once, I completely agree with you, Hades. Poseidon nodded, grinning a bit himself as he walked up beside him. It is good to see you both. Hestia smiled warmly at the two as she came closer, before briefly focusing her attention on her twin. How have you been faring in your special training, by the way, Beerus? It's been going fine, I suppose. Beerus shrugged, giving his kind-hearted sister a small smile himself. Her close presence never failing to make him feel just a little warmer. Her natural effect on everyone, as he well knew by this point. How has yours? We're all making good progress according to Mother. She replied affably while motioning an arm around proudly at her other siblings in training with her. Won't be too long now before it's all said and done. Good to hear. Beerus nodded in understanding. I suppose I'll have to come around soon enough and see how far you've all come with my own eyes. But first, his eyes glanced to his side, looking over to Zeus. I have something else to get to. But of course. Hestia said understandingly, looking between the two. I'll leave you both to it then. Zeus motioned his head respectably in affirmation while Beerus grunted his own, as she began walking away to give them their room. A call coming out from their mother as she moved away, telling them to follow her. Be sure to enjoy yourself out there, young one. Gaia told him with a beatific smile of her own, before making her way away. Her enormous breasts giving a noticeable bounce with each stride she took, as she followed her daughter toward their spectating spot. Metis took that moment to whisper something in Zeus's ear, which Beerus picked up with his impressive hearing. You know what you need to do, yeah. He nodded, and she gave him a quick peck on the cheek. Good. So long as you remember that, everything's fine. How curious. Sounds like she's formed a battle plan with him. Beerus thought as he smirked amusedly. Let's see where this goes, and if I'll be able to enjoy myself here as Gaia says. Good luck out there, Beerus. The soon-to-be god of destruction was snapped out of his thoughts at that, turning towards the cheery feminine voice who'd called out to him. His eyes landed on Demeter, who waved at him with a bright smile on her as she walked back from him. Hope you have fun with your spar. She remarked good-naturedly before blowing him a happy kiss when she saw he was looking. Beerus crushed the memory of those very same lips on his not too long ago before it had a chance to resurface, as he waved back awkwardly. Face set between neutral and a grimace, as he mentally hoped that she didn't get the impulse anymore to do that to him again and make him even more confused and weirded out by his new body in the process. He spotted Hera coming up right by her a second later, sending a rather peculiar look his way as she walked with an odd sway to her hips. A bizarre, knowing smirk on her features as though she'd figured something about him, though as to what, he wasn't quite sure. It was probably nothing. He need not concern himself with whatever was going on in that woman's head, at least for now. He had a more pressing, and as Demeter had put it, hopefully a fun matter to get to with his baby brother. Metis had left Zeus's side by this point and went to join the others who were moving a fair amount away. Joining up right beside Rhea and Gia as they came to a stop a decent distance from them, all eyes coming on them intently. Shall we get started then? Beerus asked loud enough for everyone to hear, as he fully turned to his brother, placing his hands behind his back and pressing his fists together in a rather casual, relaxed stance. You're free to go first if you want. I'll wait for your attack. That's mighty kind of you, brother. Zeus met his gaze as he turned as well, the two only about 2 meters removed from each other. His expression serious, focused. His electric blue eyes narrowing on him like a hawk. You certain you don't want to attack first? Beerus could tell he was just trying to be courteous there. Yep. Go right ahead. He motioned him on. First move's yours. Do try not to waste it. As you wish. Zeus acquiesced. Then, a split second later, his muscular frame sprung forward from where he'd previously stood, giving him a solid amount of momentum and quickly closing the distance between them, as he reared back a fist. Not a half bad punch, but he's telegraphing it a bit too much. Beerus thought as he saw him come close. And just as Zeus thrust his fist forward, carrying a decent level of force, Beerus easily dodged the punch and watched his little brother starting to sail by him as he sidestepped the predictable blow. Overextending as well. Someone committed a bit too much to that. Deciding to go light for now, Beerus struck out right into Zeus's flank with a simple kick, aiming directly for the left side of his ribcage. To his mild surprise, however, Zeus' form glowed and disappeared, leaving behind specks of gold as his kick missed its mark. His instincts then came to life as a dim light resurfaced behind him and ducked, narrowly avoiding a sweeping kick from a now airborne Zeus aimed at his head. Before he could glance back at him, Zeus' form vanished the same way once again, and reappeared by his side with another fist already cocked back. Beerus was quick to snap his focus to him, and as he saw the fist begin to sail forward in its predictable path, he was already in the process of leaning back to avoid it. Once Zeus vanished again, however, only to re-emerge at his front and right in his guard with his fist still flying in, the former god of Universe 7's eyes widened ever so slightly, as he swiftly reclined back. The knuckles of his younger sibling sailing in and looking to be only just missing him by a hair. The instant he saw Zeus's hand begin to open up, however, and saw the cheeky grin on his face just as his body gave that faint glow again, Beerus realized instantly he'd made a slight error. The silver-haired fledgling's body then once again flashed away before reappearing in the direction Beerus was reclining back in. The latter's eyes snapped up to him as he loomed over, hands clasped above his head before he deftly swung them downward. His upper body swinging down with it in an axe-handle strike plunging toward the elder brother's exposed features. Looking poised to smash his skull in. Reacting quick, despite his leaned-back position, Beerus torqued his hips sideways as he kicked off of the ground, his body spinning through the air and off to the side. Not only avoiding the axe handle blow that swung down on nothing but air, but also left him with his body turned at an elevated position, with a perfect shot right by Zeus's own exposed head. Huh, so, he can spam that teleportation ability, can he? Beerus pulled his outer leg and narrowed his amber pools. Nice little trick, but I've already dealt with something like this before. Swiping his leg forward like a cleaver, it cut through the air as it arced right for the side of Zeus's temple with about half the force he'd bludgeoned Atlas within his first strike against him. The purple-haired deity expected him, if able to react, to teleport away again, possibly to take him from his back this time. Instead, however, once Zeus caught the blur of his leg cleaving toward his face, his form shimmered slightly and before Beerus's even more surprised eyes, changed shape. His body morphing just as the front of his foot was close to touching his skin and turning into an obsidian-skinned snake that speedily coiled up around the swung appendage. The serpentine head hissing as it reached by Beerus's exposed stomach, and the serpent suddenly morphed back, becoming Zeus's muscular form once more. The younger brother now also airborne, and in front of Beerus as his knees came up to his chest, before letting out a grunt of exertion as he thrusted his feet forward with breakneck speed. The soles of his feet stomping right into the surprised elder brother's chest, causing the latter to let out a light gasp of air as a solid shockwave billowed out from the strength of the dropkick and sent Beerus's body hurtling back. A stronger gust of wind blanketing the area as the former used the blow he delivered to backflip away and land gracefully in a crouched position. Meanwhile, Beerus grit his teeth as he careened through the air, forcing back control over his hurtling form with relative ease and flipping over as his feet dug into the ground. Twin trenches forming in the soil as the friction built up and slowed him down until he came to a stop a second or so later. The trenches formed by his feet several meters long and a good few deep near the end, as he found himself a good half a kilometer away from his initial position. Well now, isn't that something? Gia grinned with her arms crossed beneath her massive melons, pushing their supple flesh up as she watched the first exchange appraisingly. Zeus is the first to land in this little jewel. Yes, and with a sublime counter using shape-shifting no less. Rhea nodded approvingly with a motherly smile of pride, as she too crossed her arms beneath her bosom. The counters I've seen from my other children so far in training aren't quite that good when it comes to split-second decisions like that was. He's been trained well, it seems. The praise is appreciated. Metis smiled a bit with appreciation, but otherwise kept a stoic expression. However, this spar has only just started. Zeus has plenty more to show. As I'm sure Beerus does too. Gia added with a knowing look. She, along with both other women, could tell the older brother wasn't even trying yet. Same with the two siblings watching on beside them. Despite being a little surprised themselves that Zeus struck home first, they also knew Beerus had yet to actually exert himself properly in any capacity. She didn't doubt Zeus knew this too, as he kept his eyes locked on his brother from the distance he'd created between them. Beerus touched a hand to his chest, feeling only a small tingle on it from where he'd been hit. The strength behind it had been good, but barely even enough to put a very light bruise on him at most before it instantly healed over. Even still, whilst he wasn't trying yet, the fact remained Zeus had struck first blood with that cheeky stunt he just pulled. Hey, he chuckled, staring out at Zeus with a hint of mirth. Not bad, Zeus. For a first exchange, that was all right. So, he can not only spam teleportation, but also shapeshift, huh? Now this certainly is amusing. There's more where that came from, I assure you, brother. Zeus called back, tensing his body in preparation for his brother's next response. Keeping an eye on him for any sudden moves. You gonna start using your arms now? Beerus only smirked at his reply, bending his legs as he brought his arms back behind him, fists once again touching against each other by his back. All as his body naturally began to lean forward heavily. Not just yet. You'll have to work a little harder for that. Just then, Beerus launched himself forward, his form blurring as the ground beneath him ripped apart. An entire chunk being torn right out with a shockwave as he shot forward. Zeus's eyes widened, almost completely blindsided by his brother's huge jump in speed, despite knowing he'd been holding back, as he closed the distance between them in no time. The purple-haired deity already within his guard again as he swung his foot up in an arc at a blistering speed toward his chin. The silver-haired god only just reacting in time and teleporting away, narrowly avoiding have his head probably kicked off by barely a centimeter. The sheer force alone behind the kick whipping up a powerful wind gust that billowed through the area. Zeus immediately appeared behind him to throw a punch at the back of his head, but Beerus, as if knowing he'd be behind him, leapt off the ground with his other foot in a backflip. His body sailing right over the younger brother's fist as he looked down at him from a good meter above. Electric blue eyes managed to glance up, as the older of the two flipped fully while in midair, pulling one knee up to his chest right above his head. And once again, the younger brother only just managed to teleport out of there as the sole of Beerus's foot came driving down in a powerful stomp. One which caused a massive 7-meter wide and deep crater where it fell, pulverizing the ground beneath it. Zeus reappeared again sweating a bit, once again by his side with a fist cocked back and drove it hard into Beerus's cheek. The punch landing flush on the side of the elder's face, or so it seemed. He was taken aback in the next instant, when Beerus's face seemed to roll with the punch. His body twisting around using the momentum given and raising his outer leg up in another blurringly fast arc with a picture-perfect spinning axe kick right towards his head. He vanished again with golden specks, this time only avoiding the counterattack by millimeters, as he reappeared right in front of Beerus again, already throwing another haymaker for the middle of his face, only to catch Beerus's smirk back at him. Before he could quite tell why, the blur of something was caught in the corner of his eye and slammed right into the side of his face before he could react. His head rattling momentarily as he was sent careening off to the side himself, his body ripping off a good chunk of ground from the edge of the crater they'd been in, as he was sent haphazardly rolling at extreme velocity across the area. Like Beerus, but with more effort on his end, he was able to right himself after a little bit, turning to face forward as he dug his hands and feet into the soil to slow himself. The act digging 4 similar-sized ditches several meters long as he came to a stop in a hunched-over position. Meanwhile, the older brother lowered the same leg he'd used for the axe kick prior, and gave his other leg a little scratch with it, before hopping out of the crater to more flat ground. What just happened there? Poseidon asked in confusion. Not sure. Hades answered uncertainly, though no less had an almost childlike grin etched on him from enjoying watching the spar play out so far. If I had to guess though, I think Beerus just feinted him with that spinning kick to bait him in for the second one. Right you are, Hades. Rhea remarked, garnering the twos and by extension, the rest of children's brief attention. It seems he knew Zeus would avoid the first using teleportation, as that's how he's chosen to avoid all his attacks up to now, so he used an attack that couldn't be so clearly seen as bait to Zeus to lure him into another. He'd also have had to utterly halt his momentum with it, and then reverse course in the other direction in the same instant. An extremely awkward maneuver from the looks of it, and one that didn't even carry a third of the force that would have been behind the blow that preceded it. "Looks like I got you that time," Beerus called out, bringing the spectators' attention back to him as he rolled his neck around, still looking rather casual about the whole affair. "You said there was more to come. You might want to kick it up a notch now then, Zeus. Otherwise I'm afraid this'll get boring rather fast." Rather than look distraught or even annoyed, Zeus actually chuckled a little after shaking off Beerus's attack. The dark bruise that had formed where he'd been hit healing away in the blink of an eye. A sky blue outline forming around his body, as the muscles around his biceps and thighs bulged. "As you wish." Rather than teleport straight away this time, Zeus blasted off the ground, his bulky frame zooming toward the stationary Beerus like a thunderbolt as he crossed the distance in no time at all. His fist reared all the way back, and from Beerus's perspective, was glowing dimly with the blue aura now outlining him. Beerus responded in kind by swiftly thrusting his foot up in a front kick aimed for his face. The fastest attack he'd thrown yet, which looked set to collide and smash the younger relative's face as he came hurtling in. Instead of being caught this time, Zeus' eyes narrowed like slits as he saw the kick snap out, his body shape shifting right as it was a hair's breadth away and swerving around it, as he transformed into a small bird, his wings flapping once as he glided over Beerus's outstretched leg and moved right inside guard again. "So, you can morph yourself into more than just a snake, huh? I thought as much." Beerus's smirk broadened a bit, as he used his other foot to leap back from the bird, going right over the crater he'd previously made. Before his feet even landed down on the ground though, the bird vanished in specks of gold again, and before his very eyes, reappeared not in his humanoid form, but in that of a massive, hulking bull with hair a perfect shade of white. In a fraction of a second later, the bull's head plowed straight into Beerus' sternum, knocking some wind, spittle, and some drops of ichor out of his mouth as the horns stabbed into him. Zeus then immediately transformed back to his normal form to deliver a swift uppercut while he could, the punch snapping Beerus' head back with a sizable shockwave that expanded out as far as the spectators watching, hitting them all with a powerful wind gust and forcing their siblings to squint and shield themselves a bit with an arm. Not wanting to waste the opportunity where Beerus was seemingly defenseless, Zeus pressed on with his assault, launching strike after punishing strike just as strong as the last and the same after effect. A left hook to the cheek followed by a right, then another left, then a right again, before cracking him atop his temple, each one smacking his head around as well as forming a deeper and deeper crater beneath them from the force exerted, before he delivered a lightning-fast knee to the gut to bend him over, which was then followed up immediately by him teleporting about a meter in front of him and smashing the front of his foot up right into his chin with a soccer kick that snapped him right back up again and off the ground, the deepening crater beneath having formed with the one Beerus created and then some. Their onlookers were either left in some bit of awe or quite impressed by his displayed abilities that easily surpassed that of the spectating siblings, as Zeus struck him with a heavy punch to the gut and sent him flying back, droplets of ichor spilling to the ground as he went from the two holes that had been pierced in him by the horns, but which quickly closed up and healed as his feet dug back into the ground again. Not that it meant much, as Zeus teleported by his side as a bird soaring in at top speed to build up a nice level of momentum before he morphed back and slammed into his cheek with another punch that sent him rocketing over to the side. Teleporting again, he met him just as his feet touched down with a vicious knee to his side that bent his body over a good bit, before continuing with another hail of blows. A combination of different punches and kicks in sequence to batter him all over his front. Whoa, he's actually giving Beerus a beating, Demeter commented with no small amount of surprise. Even knowing that the older of the two was definitely still holding back. It doesn't even look like he can defend himself right now. Are you sure about that, young lady? Gia asked her pointedly with a smile, one that was mirrored by Rhea as she garnered her attention. What do you mean? The blonde beauty asked back with some befuddlement, only for Hera to scoff and be the one to answer her. Look closer, Demeter. The youngest sister said, whilst she folded her arms around her midsection and scrutinized the supposed beating going on. It's not even close to as one-sided as it seems at first glance. Demeter did so, looking in as close as she could, and saw Zeus land another punch right into Beerus's cheek. On closer inspection, however, she, along with the others, could make out their older brother's head wasn't really snapping away, but more rolling with the punch like it had done before. The next several blows that rained over his face being much the same, as rather than have any pained expression, Beerus was grinning like a madman instead. You see it now, young Demeter? Gia asked politely as they watched Zeus strike out with another knee for his gut, which made contact, but only just, as Beerus pulled his stomach back right at the point of collision. Zeus's first flurry certainly landed full on, but his latest set is being cleverly neutered. Beerus is moving his body in tandem with the force and direction of Zeus's attacks, so while they're making contact, the overall amount of power he's actually being struck with is greatly diminished. I see it, yeah. She nodded affirmatively, watching as an uppercut was thrown by Zeus again, and as soon as his knuckles clipped against Beerus's chin, the latter willfully rotated both his body and head up where the punch was heading. His eyes kept on Zeus's movements the entire time and flawlessly moving in sync with his strikes. But why isn't he fighting back then? The fledgling goddess was given her answer not even a moment later, when Zeus overextended himself with a straight punch aimed for Beerus's nose. A glint sparking in the elder's amber pools, as suddenly he ducked underneath the punch with a speed he hadn't yet shown, leaving an afterimage behind where the fist sailed through. And then, in a time frame so small light might as well have been moving at a snail's pace, one of Beerus's hands finally flew out from behind his back in a clenched fist and propelled forward directly within Zeus's exposed front. Grr! The air crashed out of Zeus's lungs, as the heavy blow to the gut sent him rocketing forward with a thunderously loud sonic boom echoing behind. His body hurtling directly into one of the smaller mountains upon Crete and smashing into it with a seismic shockwave that billowed throughout it. The entire isle lightly shaking from the impact for a brief instant. Even knowing he'd been holding back all along, the siblings watching outside of Hestia blinked in astonishment at the sudden turn of events. Gia didn't look surprised in the least, and nor did Rhea really, given what she'd been told about his skirmish with her brothers and nephew a while back in Cronus Castle. Though she did whistle, looking very impressed seeing her eldest son's powerful counter flip the scales completely in his favor in one go. Then again, they were probably never against him truly to begin with. Metis, strangely enough, didn't react in the least to seeing her consort effectively get smacked away in such devastating fashion. Her face was calm and collected as she watched the proceedings with her hands clasped in front of her below her waist. Beerus tilted his head and spat a small glob of ichor onto the soil beside him, before bringing a hand up to his neck and cracking it twice as his head tilted back and forth. The fledgling god grinning amusedly despite the small bit of ichor also dribbling from the corner of his lips. Those latest attacks had packed much more power behind them than any of Zeus's previous attacks, and more than he was expecting if he was being honest. That alone confirmed his suspicion that Zeus had also been holding back up to now, it seemed, and perhaps still was to some extent. Whatever reason he was doing so, probably to get a read on him first, meant nothing to him at the end of the day. HMPH. Don't get ahead of yourself now, Zeus. Beerus snorted derisively, pulling back his outstretched arm as he spoke loud enough for his younger sibling to hear him from the considerable distance he'd just sent him. You've got some solid power to you. That, and the effective use of those two abilities in combat is rather impressive, I'll admit. However, it seems as though your hand-to-hand skills are rather lacking by comparison. Even with all that vanishing and reappearing you were pulling, it couldn't mask just how painfully predictable your moves actually are. Ugh, the silver-haired fledgling deity groaned, as he rose himself up out of the wide crater formed in the mountain by his hurtled body. A massive bruise having formed where he'd been hit, his ribcage partially caved in from the blow, with golden ichor dripping from his lips as he stood back up to his feet. The wound beginning to repair itself rather quickly already. I'm still learning, brother. And I'm far from done, he said gruffly, before his form all but shimmered away. Beerus caught the flash of his youngest brother's body zooming towards him at breakneck speeds in the meantime, as a dark purple outline formed over him. Some of his real power being brought to the fore, as he now saw him coming as though it was in slow motion, and watched the fist aimed directly for his face coming in with a sharp eye. Rather than dodge it though, Beerus brought his own hand up, and caught the punch in his palm. The attack shredding the ground beneath him apart once more, forming the deepest crater yet, as rocks and debris flew and scattered up everywhere. Yet Beerus himself didn't budge an inch this time. You've got decent ferocity, little brother. The purple-haired former god of Universe 7 complimented, before using his caught fist to pull the younger of them and drill his knee into his just then healed midsection. The counter leaving his brother gasping as he bent over. But you lack any real finesse with your attacks. He then followed up with a hard chop to the back of the neck, reminiscent of his former master and friend Whis, which sent Zeus slamming face first into the hard soil beneath them. This made the crater they were in several feet wider and deeper as a result. Without it, no matter how much power you're packing, you're just an idiot flailing his arms about. As soon as one gets over those two abilities of yours, you'd be doing nothing but hoping to land a lucky shot on a sufficiently skilled opponent. Despite the pain he was in, Zeus's eyes narrowed as he struck out from the ground, torquing his body as he swung a leg out, attempting to sweep Beerus clean off his legs. Something that failed as Beerus jumped back and easily avoided it, as the younger of the two surged back to his feet. His knees bending as one foot came out before the other, and he launched himself towards the elder sibling. A flurry of blows, both punches and kicks flying out from almost every angle as he got within striking distance. Teleporting around him as well every few strikes to keep him from reading his movements as easily. Oh, please. Beerus bobbed and weaved around each and every one regardless, resisting the urge to roll his eyes as he dodged all of the attacks coming for him without issue. What did I just say? Sidestepping a straight left, Beerus's hand shot out and slammed palm first into the man's face with enough force to push him back a good number of yards away from the crater. His heels digging into the ground and leaving small, twin trenches as he was forced backwards before coming to a stop. Your vanishing act won't give any advantage against me now. Even with it, I can tell exactly what you're going to do before you even do it, because you're telegraphing your attacks way too much. Hee, you can tell just like that, huh? Zeus rubbed his sore face a bit as he recovered from the damage that had been inflicted. questioning a bit as to why it was so quickly, when Atlas and their father hadn't been able to do so but chalked it up to Beerus having enough control to not do the same to him. You really are something, you know that, brother. You only just figuring that out now. Beerus replied somewhat teasingly, as he moved out of their latest crater. His aura still present around his frame as his muscles bulged a bit themselves. In any case, I think that's enough playing around now. If you've got any power left that you haven't used yet, I suggest you bring it out. Trust me, you'll need it. He considers that playing around. Poseidon said somewhat incredulously. We're not even at the level they just showed just yet, and he calls that playing around. Way to make us feel inadequate. Now, Poseidon. It isn't really that surprising, is it? Hestia glanced at him kindly, not put off in the least by their brother's statement. After all, he's had a full grasp over his inner power since the day he got us out of our father's stomach and is continuing to grow in strength even now. He's still well ahead of us all, so this shouldn't come as a shock. The same can be said about Zeus to a certain degree as well, seeing as he also apparently has a full grasp over his own, whilst we're still training for ours. Hestia's right. There's no point bellyaching about it. Hades spoke up again, looking excited at what he was seeing. Just keep watching and enjoy the show, brother. Try to learn from watching 'em, because I know I am. Poseidon sighed, knowing they had a point as he and them brought their attention back to the two brothers out from him, just as Zeus started laughing. Something funny? Beerus asked with a small bit of bemusement as his little brother seemed to go into a bit of hysterics. Sorry, brother, Zeus said as he calmed down, an odd deal of mirth in his eyes as he locked gazes with his elder. I don't know what's come over me. I must admit, before we started, I was still quite nervous coming into this, knowing how strong you are. But now, he rose a hand and looked at it as it shook. Not with fear though, or even the slightest bit of trepidation. I can't explain why, but for some reason, all I'm beginning to feel is this odd thrill within me. This strange feeling of exhilaration that's like nothing I've ever felt before. Oh. Is that so? Beerus grinned wide enough to show his teeth. The former god of the now erased universe 7 understanding almost immediately what was going on. It was a feeling he himself had felt on occasion during the old days of his previous life and was sure to feel again in this one. Zeus was experiencing the excitement that only a true warrior could during battle. That's good to hear. For the first time since meeting his youngest brother, Beerus felt like he could genuinely relate to him. A connection to him bred through their individual fighting spirits. Hey. My apologies again, brother. Zeus got a hold of himself after a moment, his electric blue eyes beginning to glow as the aura around him became denser. The fullest extent of his inner power being drawn to the surface, making his muscles pop and bulge even further as he locked eyes with his older sibling once again. It appears that I've kept you waiting. Shall we continue? Beerus's amber eyes also began to glow, as his aura thickened just a little more. His grin spreading wider as he felt something akin to delight bubble up within him. Bring it. Zeus didn't need to be told twice. The instant those two words had left the elder's lips, he all but burst the ground beneath him with a shockwave felt by all, as he surged forth like the return stroke of lightning. Beerus's legs spread apart in a defensive stance, as he brought his forearm up to block the punch that came shooting. The soon-to-be destroyer god remaining rooted in place, as a missive shockwave blasted through behind him, ripping the ground asunder and shattering debris past the crater behind him. A trench forming about 20 meters long and over 10 meters deep as the isle shook again. though a little more lightly than before. Using his other hand, Beerus struck out with a punch of his own which hit nothing but light specks as Zeus teleported away again, only to reappear above him, fist cocked back before he threw down for his skull. An attack that Beerus saw coming easily and hopped away to avoid it. His feet skidding a little off the ground as he watched massive chunks of the ground get smashed off as Zeus's fist impacted where he'd been. A dust cloud being kicked up from it, briefly obscuring his view until it was quickly dispersed as he came charging back out in bull form once again. His four muscle-bound legs stomping the earth beneath him down in heavy hoof prints. Rather than get hit like he did the first time, Beerus waited until Zeus's horns were mere inches away before he bent down crouching and twisted his body so that his back faced the oncoming bull. His shoulder come to touch right around the bull Zeus's neck as he came upon him and reached up above to grab him by the horns. Using a mix of some of his strength and his shape-shifted brother's own momentum, he pulled the bull's bulky frame right off the ground and flipped the four-legged creature's body around as he tossed him over his shoulder in one go. The bull, while careening through the air, morphed into a bird that twirled its winged frame several times to gain control of itself as it turned back in Beerus' direction and glided toward him. The purple-haired god brought his hand out in response to catch the bird as it came speeding in, only for it to morph again, this time into a tiny fly that buzzed right through the gaps of his fingers. The fly looking poised to get right up in his grill until its trajectory was stopped cold. Its tiny body get trapped between the index and middle fingers of Beerus's other hand that shot out to intercept. "Now where do you think you're going?" Beerus asked cheekily, before flicking his wrist and fingers, sending the fly hurtling away with another sonic boom to follow after it. Zeus' body transformed back to normal as he flipped through the air, digging his heels into the ground to stop himself as he launched back in, tearing up another chunk of earth in the process. His body talking a little as he wound up a powerful blow that made veins appear around his arm. His aura glowing around his clenched fist as he thrust forward, only to be met with punchback from Beerus colliding with his own. The combined force sending another huge shockwave passing around them, cratering the ground they stood on wider and deeper than ever as the isle quaked again. "Hey. You're persistent, I'll give you that," Beerus remarked earnestly, as they separated. "But persistence can only get you so far," he yelled as they came back in, beginning to trade blows with each other. Most of which were dodged by the other, either using just quick reflexes in Beerus's case, or teleporting and shapeshifting in Zeus's. The few that did land were surprisingly blocked by both parties, though the younger doing so with noticeably more effort than the elder, as they whizzed around the area. Shockwave after shockwave coming forth as they left one crater after another in their blurring form's wake. "It seems this has become quite the spectacle between the two, don't you think?" Rhea commented astutely from a safe distance away. Both amusement and pride in her motherly eyes as she saw her youngest and oldest sons battle intensely. The former attempting to block Beerus's latest punch, only to be sent flying back this time from the sheer force behind it, as Beerus increased his own power output. Indeed. Gia nodded close to her side, as she watched Zeus recover quick and jump right back into the fray trading attacks with his brother. Even though he was starting to get steadily knocked away more and more as he did. Beerus is certainly not going easy on him. I can tell that he's now finally begun taking him somewhat seriously, though it's obvious he isn't using the full extent of his own inner power. Even still, I can tell he's enjoying himself out there. Both of them are, it seems. Rhea observed, catching the two smiling madly at each other as they battled on, pulverizing the terrain as they went. the younger seeming unperturbed despite starting to get slowly overwhelmed. She then chanced a glance beside her at Metis, who didn't seem the slightest bit worried even now, when it started to become clearer that Zeus was most likely going to lose. What do you think about this, Metis? Zeus has done well, but it doesn't look like he'll be claiming a victory with how this fight is starting to go. Claim a victory? Metis mouthed, not put off in the least by the rather factual statement from the mother of seven. Her eyes never leaving the fight taking place before them. I believe there's a misunderstanding going on here. Rhea blinked, making a sound of confusion at the Oceanide's words, but couldn't dwell on it for long, as her attention was drawn back fully to the high-octane spar between her sons. Come on, is that all you got? Put your back into it. Beerus bellowed with some bit of elation, as a veritable storm of blows was traded between both. Every third strike of his landing on Zeus despite him blocking and sending him flying back, only for him to immediately teleport right back into his grill for another round. Beerus occasionally using his arm or knee to block or parry the strikes that would have taken more effort to dodge. You call that a guard? He yelled before finally breaking through and burying a fist into his little brother's gut, knocking both wind and spittle mixed with ichor from his open maw. And here I thought just your attacks left much to be desired. Zeus coughed hard, but otherwise steeled himself to continue the bout. Undeterred by Beerus's blatant trash talk. Oh yeah. Their hands locked together then, as they seemingly entered a test of strength. I could say the same back to you, brother. Your punches are starting to feel a little limp, if I'm being honest. Oh, shut your trap, you blowhard. Acting tough won't get you anywhere. Beerus began to push him back, forcing Zeus's heels to dig deep into the ground just to keep himself steady as he got overpowered. Even still, he met his brother's damn near manic gaze with his own, undaunted by his fierce power. A far cry from how he'd been before. You should take your own advice, brother, he replied as he came to a stop. Otherwise, you might end up on your ass. He bellowed back, as his foot sliced up through the air, and for the first time in a while, his attack clipped soundly into his brother as it nailed him under his chin. The kick snapping Beerus' head back and clattering his teeth together, as his grip seemed to slacken compared to Zeus's. You cheeky little shit. The moment was exceedingly short-lived, as Beerus's own leg swung, clipping Zeus's other leg and knocking him off his feet before the other could come back down. The aura around Beerus's body glimmering just a little more as his body wrenched forward. His hands slipping away from Zeus's as he reared back before crashing his fist down into Zeus's face in the next instant, battering him hard into the ground below. The aisle shaking more than ever from the enormous shockwave produced as a ginormous cavity formed from the silver-haired god's impacting frame, bigger and deeper than any ditch they'd made yet in their spar. A sickening crunch following it, with the blow shattering his nose in just about every place as it caved into his face. Might end up on my ass, huh? Don't get ahead of yourself, he shouted hotly, before rearing back again for another destructive punch. One that stopped just before hitting the ground as his younger brother's frame shimmered out from below him, reappearing a few meters away from him. Ichor spilling down his chin and over his chest as his nose quickly began repairing itself. A wide, toothy smile showed on his bloody face despite the temporary facelift given to him. An unearthly joy resonating through him in a way he simply just couldn't explain, despite the pain he felt. This exhilaration pumping through him right now was too intoxicating. It was almost equivalent to the deepest thralls of passion he'd had with Metis when they were having sex, and that was saying something. I'm not done yet, brother. He yelled strongly, starting nasally before reverting back to his normal tone of voice. Not by a long shot. Don't get cocky now, Zeus. It'll ruin you. Beerus yelled back, as Zeus zipped in. Both rearing back before their fists crossed paths once again. A flurry from both coming after. Punches and kicks flying and shooting by, as both young gods once again started moving rapidly around the area. Their forms both zipping out of sight for brief instances as they smashed up more of the terrain and made Crete shiver. Due to their training, all of the two siblings could keep their balance perfectly from the aftereffects they were causing to the environment. However, that didn't mean they could completely keep up with what was going on, as their forms continued to disappear and then reappear in different location. Not through teleportation this time, but through pure, raw speed. Fuck me, I can barely follow what's going on at all. Poseidon felt a few beads of sweat over his temple, in total awe of what he was seeing. Same here, Hades agreed. Almost spellbound by the spectacle going on before them. Gonna be honest, I didn't expect too much from Zeus going into this, but he's holding his own out there at a significantly higher level than anything we're currently capable of. I know Beerus must still be holding back, but I doubt even he's not impressed by Zeus's effort at this point. And this is only the surface, young ones. Gia spoke up over the theatrics, garnering each of the siblings' attention, but not their sight, which remained on what they could see of their brothers fighting. As impressive as this must look to you all, it is but only an insignificant taste of what you'll all be capable of someday. That, I assure you. Those two especially in front of them. If they could shake and damage the Isle like this even when it was under the protection of her divine magic, it spoke volumes about the potential of not just Beerus, but Zeus as well. No doubt this was making quite the impression on their latest visitors watching from afar. For several minutes more, the brothers continued to clash. Zeus foregoing his teleportation and shapeshifting entirely in the final stretch in service to meeting Beerus fist to fist. Pure hand to hand, which certainly wasn't the brightest decision by any means, but the younger of the two didn't seem to care at this point. Not even when his guard was broken through one time after another and got dealt a vicious blow that broke his divine bones. His jaw, his arms, his ribs, and one of his hips, all in that order. Yet he simply came back swinging in spite of it all, each injury healing up as he did. Hey, he really is quite tenacious. Beerus thought, observing every move from him analytically as he countered, blocked and parried his attacks while throwing his own back. The reborn deity noticing incremental changes in his stance, defenses and attacks as this went on. His reactions to my attacks, as well as his own attacks, they're becoming sharper it seems. Before, in his eyes, Zeus's moves were little more than him flailing his arms around, with little real skill involved in them. At least compared to himself, anyway. Now however, while by no means perfect, or even remotely close to his level of skill and technique, his movements were becoming more fluid. Becoming less janky with every small moment that passed. Ah, he's learning from me as he fights. And quite quickly too. He noted astutely. Zeus was paying attention to every detail that he could about how he moved around, and was soaking it in like a sponge, using them to improve his own in the process. Even though it was by no means enough to bridge the gap and allow him to bypass his guard at all, Beerus still found himself being impressed. Even a little nostalgic, as this strangely reminded him of his second battle with Son Goku once he'd been granted the Super Saiyan God form. Eventually though, Beerus broke through Zeus's guard once again with a ferocious haymaker to the face. The crunching of his nose shattering inward again, reaching his ears as Zeus was blasted off his feet and sent hurtling back at frightening speeds. Before he could recover though, Beerus blitzed into existence right where he was going. And sending him smashing back first into the ground, giving another mighty quake to the isle as a gigantic crater was made yet again from the collision. Beerus twirled right as he was about to land, his feet coming down on either side of his waist as he bent down. Zeus, perhaps just on pure instinct, threw a punch from the ground toward his face, which was caught by Beerus without any problem. Even with the intense shockwave and blast of wind generated from the contact. Despite being in the process of rapidly fixing itself, his face still looked quite the mess, with golden blood splotching it, with his nose looking quite crooked and damaged. His forehead partially caved in from the heel he'd just taken to it. Ichor dripping out of his mouth and not completely fixed nasal passages. Rearing back a fist, Beerus pumped more power into it than he had yet. A menacing dark purple glow highlighted a bit with gold shone through, as his aura coalesced densely around his clenched hand. Veins beginning to pop around his heavily muscled arm, as the power being condensed into his fist produced waves that traveled out well past the crater he'd made and lit up enough for everyone to see it clearly. And feel its pressure too. Zeus found himself mesmerized for a moment, looking up at his brother and feeling the sheer amount of destructive power being packed into that single punch he had cocked back. "It's over," Beerus said matter-of-factly. Not a hint of hyperbole in his tone, as his fist rained down like a crashing meteor. The resulting explosion of force that came right after shook the very foundations of the divine magic, enhanced style. A stupendously strong shockwave along with gale force winds buffeted all around Crete, cracking the ground all around the crater in a wide radius like an egg before chunks and pieces of debris broke off and flew into the air. The others, who were far enough away to not deal with the splintering terrain, did still have to deal with the immense shaking the ground did beneath. The siblings were forced to shield themselves with their forearms more than ever, grunting hard as the power behind the wind and shockwave forced them all back. Their heels digging into the ground as their hair flew back wildly. Metis being much the same in this instance to a lesser extent. Only Rhea and Gia were not pushed back by it, though that didn't stop their hair from fluttering back like crazy as well. The former's eyes squinting, whilst the latter's vision was momentarily covered. A sound of surprise leaving her lips as the updraft was great enough to lift her gargantuan globes of flesh high up from her chest, hiding her face almost entirely. They were kept like that for a good moment, before the forceful blasts of wind and the shockwave finally calmed down. Her bouncy mounds of heaven coming down back unto her folded arms with a hefty, audible boing as they wobbled profusely on their perch. Nipples all but scrapping at the calming gusts still buffeted 'em all. A dust cloud had been kicked up again from the aftermath of Beerus's final blow, as all of the broken chunks and debris from the ground came falling back down and crumbling once they did. Once the dust cleared, however, they all peered in to see what the damage was like. What they saw, however, was Beerus hunched over, with his fist stopped in its tracks just an inch off from actually striking home, with Zeus staring upright at it. His face totally unharmed as it fully healed back to normal. "This match is done," Beerus stated a second later, loud enough for the spectators to pick up. He then pulled his hand away and opened it up as he brought it to his side, standing up to his full height almost. "I don't need to crush your skull to know that we're finished here, wouldn't you say?" he asked with an entertained smile, actually offering a hand to his fallen brother, showing a bit of genuine respect. Zeus, recognizing his sound defeat, simply chuckled again. no longer nervous or anxious around his elder brother, as he accepted the offered hand graciously. If anything, after what he'd just been through, he looked happy as he was brought back up to his feet. Content even. I suppose so, brother. I concede. That was one heck of a match. I agree. You fought quite admirably, though rather sloppily by my standards. Beerus nodded, unable to stop himself from throwing in a harsh criticism with his praise. I can't help but notice you're rather happy despite losing, though. A spar isn't about who wins or loses. The real purpose behind it is to show off what you've learned, and to improve upon what you have already through taking on another. To learn from your opponent so that you may be made better. Zeus grinned. That's what Metis told me, and in that sense, I see this as a win regardless. Is that right? Beerus laughed, glancing briefly over in said woman's direction. Can't say I disagree with that. If I'm being honest though, I was under the impression she wanted you to come in and defeat me. Not even for a moment. Zeus shook his head. She knew from the start it was highly unlikely I could beat you. She proposed this spar between us to prove a point to you. Prove a point. Beerus looked at him curiously. And what was that? That we were actually worth a damn. Zeus relayed with unhidden gaiety. His tone full of humor. She took offense to what you said before we all started training that we weren't worth a damn, so she set this up between us and trained me as hard as she could to prove you wrong. Did she now? Beerus glanced back at her again, eyes full of mirth this time as he saw her smiling back at them. Not the least bit put out by her consort's loss. If anything, she seemed quite satisfied. Well, I don't admit this often, but I have to say, that woman of yours did indeed just prove me wrong with your performance. She did quite the job with you. Not so much when it came to your hand-to-hand, but everything else was done quite well. I'm sure she'll appreciate hearing that. Zeus said, sounding quite pleased himself with the praise. She also said that both of us would benefit from this, and I guess she wasn't wrong there either. Beerus conceded himself, turning his gaze back to him. I was aware of that first ability you used, since you used it with her to get us to this place after I smashed through Cronus Castle. I wasn't aware of the second though, where you can shapeshift into different creatures. I must say, I wouldn't mind learning them both myself after seeing how well you used them. I could teach you real quick how to do them, if you want. Zeus offered kindly, before adding in slyly, so long as you don't mind sparring with me more after this. He, you want to run that back, do you? Beerus laughed again, thoroughly entertained by the idea. I don't think I mind those terms. If you want to be my personal punching bag, who am I to stop you? Zeus couldn't help but roll his head back and roar with a bit of laughter himself at that. You're a real charmer, Beerus, you know that. Beerus shrugged with a face-splitting grin, as they both started making their way back to the others. So I've been told, Zeus. Real quick, out of curiosity, how much of your power were you actually using near the end there? He couldn't help but ask. For the punch at the end, or before that? Before that. Though I guess it couldn't hurt to know the other as well. For before, it was about 10%, I'd say. The punch was nearly half. Beerus revealed with another shrug, and Zeus just shook his head in amusement. Damn, you held back that much, huh? You could have ended this any time you wanted, if that's the case. True, but where would be the fun in that? I quite enjoyed myself there, and just ending it sooner would have just spoiled that. Fair point, I guess. Zeus nodded with some merriment, seeing the logic in his words. If their roles were switched, he might have done the same. That was truly a splendid display. They both heard a feminine voice from behind them, which brought them both to a stop, as neither recognized it. Both, now that they were closer, also seemed to notice their siblings, along with Rhea looking surprised, while Metis looked wide-eyed and with her mouth partially open in shock. As if in disbelief of what she was seeing behind them. Gia being the one exception, as she kept a knowing smile about her. The two turned around at about the same time and came face to face with a stunningly beautiful woman with long, wavy brown hair in a flowing white cloak. One that neither knew but could both tell just from being close to her that she was powerful. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. She was flanked on either side behind her by 4 figures, each with their own cloak obscuring their features. The woman smiled at them both but put more of her attention on Beerus. A look of recognition in her dark brown orbs. It is good to finally meet you, Beerus. I and my children are pleased to make your acquaintance. Beerus blinked in befuddlement at this sudden, unexpected arrival. For a moment, not quite sure how to respond to her. He ended up settling for the obvious question first though. And just, who are you? Her eyes shined, smile widening a bit. Forgive my awful manners. I suppose an introduction is in order. My name is Styx, and I as well as my children, have come to personally aid you in the coming war.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like this video if you want some more what if video. Comment 3 hearts for more what if.